Hello and welcome. I am Kaylin Goebel and I am a Program Development Specialist for OneOp. I will be moderating today's session and I'm happy to welcome you all to this webinar on weaving community safety nets for youth. If you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to our webinar platform so you can find your way around. Hopefully, you are currently able to view the slides we're sharing. If you are unable to see the slides, if you are unable to see those or have any other difficulties, please email us for tech support at contact@oneop.org. We hope you will join us in the chat pod today for conversations and questions. To embed the chat pod so you don't miss any links or conversations, simply place your cursor over the shared slides on the screen. You should then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen. From there, just click the chat bubble icon. When typing comments or questions, please be sure to select everyone from the response options drop-down menu before sending those so that everyone attending today can view your comments in the chat pod. Slides and resources are available for download on the webinar event page, and I will be covering continuing education credit information at the end of today's webinar, so please stay tuned for that if you wish to obtain CE credits. Finally, closed captioning is available for this webinar. You can turn on the subtitles via the Zoom toolbar at the bottom as well. Thank you for joining us as we continue our partnership with the Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to expand the readiness, knowledge, and networks of professionals supporting our military service members and their families. If at any point today you need to step away from the session, a recording of this presentation will be available on the webinar event page for on-demand viewing, and that is typically available within 24 to 48 hours of the conclusion of the presentation. For today's session, we are joined by Dr. Teresa Humphreys-Wadsworth. Dr. Teresa Humphreys-Wadsworth is a licensed psychologist and highly experienced public speaker. She is also an expert in mental health promotion, suicide prevention and postvention, and behavioral health crisis care. Dr. Humsworth Wadsworth Humphreys Wadsworth, provides subject matter expertise to states and territories that are working to prevent suicide among military service members, veterans, and their families. She has over 25 years of clinical experience providing mental health services to rural, remote, and urban settings, and has a deep commitment to improving outcomes for individuals with suicide risk and for those families. Before I hand things over, I wanted to give one more reminder that you can download a presentation PDF handout, as well as a list of all of the resources we will be mentioning today at the bottom of the webinar event page. And I will be covering continuing education credit information again at the end of today's session. So please stay tuned till after the conclusion to receive those instructions. And with that, I'm happy to hand things over to Dr. Teresa.
Good morning, and thank you. In addition to all those professional credentials, I want to say that I'm also a mom. I'm also a military brat. My dad served in the Air Force during Vietnam. I currently have two sons who are active duty in the Army. And so when I talk about military families, I will be sharing a little bit of our experience as well as clinical perspectives along with that. So I'm excited to be here today, and thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about suicide and suicide prevention. So we need to know, what are the warning signs of suicide risk in youth. We're going to discuss factors that are protective against suicide, and we'll talk about how to mobilize them in your community. That's really the focus of what we'll be doing today, is how can you connect with other people in your community around suicide prevention for youth, and particularly with awareness of the special needs for our military youth. We will also talk about collaborative safety planning, because as clinicians, this is a skill and a tool that we can have in our tool belt. And finally, building that collaborative network of supportive adults and services, and identifying specific steps to take to build on what you already have, or if you're not aware of what's there, how to get started building that network. So thank you all for joining us. So I want to start the webinar today by having a little poll. I would like to know a little bit about all of you who are here. So we're going to ask you to use a poll that's going to pop up here in a minute. Tell me how strongly you agree or disagree with this statement. I can list factors that are protective against suicide, and I know how to mobilize them. So you can answer strongly agree, agree, neither agree or disagree, disagree or strongly disagree. Let us know what you're thinking, and we'll get those results up here in just a second. All right, let's take a look. Okay. So most of you agree that you are aware of the protective factors and know how to mobilize them, but there's several people who do not. So I'm so glad that you're here and that we are going to be able to add that additional information for you. Okay, great. I want to begin today by talking about suicide as it is preventable. That is my belief. It is my mission. But I also know that sometimes we miss the warning signs and people die by suicide. So, in many, many, many cases, suicide is preventable. And I want us to stay with that kind of focus throughout today's presentation. All right, so let's see what the data tells us about suicide. In 2019, among the 10 leading causes of death, you can see that for those aged 10 to 14, second leading cause of death. 15 to 24, second leading cause of death. 25 to 34, second leading cause of death. Age 35 and older, you can see that people are dying by a number of medical problems that are displacing suicide, but still, it's in the top 10 for a majority of ages in the United States. Now, this was pre COVID. COVID bumped suicide down to number 11, but let's take a look for youth specifically, more recent data. In 2021, we're looking at the ages of 9 to 18, and we see that 2,292 youth died by suicide in the United States, second leading cause of injury death. But we know that death by suicide is really just the tip of the iceberg. Dying by suicide is a relatively rare event, but there are a whole lot more youth who have attempted suicide. 892,000. 3.3 million youth are having serious thoughts of suicide. And these are self reported thoughts of suicide. And we know self report is generally underreported. So we have a lot of youth who are hurting, a lot of youth who are struggling with their mental health, but we have an opportunity to identify those youth, to get them the care that they need, to teach them some coping skills so they don't have to go on to attempt or die by suicide. So we're going to start by talking about protective factors. I like focusing on the positive first. So we're going to be focusing on those personal or environmental characteristics that help protect people from suicide. And as we go through these, I want you to be thinking about your community. I want you to be thinking about who in your community might notice these protective factors, might be in a position to influence these protective factors. How might they influence them, and where might that happen? All right. The first one listed here, connectedness to individuals, families, community, and social institutions. Connectedness is our strongest protective factor. All the research tells us that this is the number one lifeline, that when people feel a strong connectedness, they are less likely to attempt suicide. They're less likely to die by suicide. It's really about that sense of belonging, that they truly belong in this group, that they have a strong identity of themselves belonging to these resources. So connected to peers, right? When we're talking about youth, their developmental stage is to connect with other peers, to identify who they are becoming, um, what is their connection within their family. So they're also at the developmental stage of loosening those close family ties so they can become an individual, but that doesn't mean they lose their connectedness to the family. So keeping connection, but also growing independence. Within their community, what does that connectedness look like? What groups are they connected to? What social institutions are they connected to? Frequently, when we think about youth, we think about schools and the extracurricular activities that youth can be involved in. We think about activities like dance or art or music or sports, debate, a variety of ways that young people can be part of a group and feel like they belong. Second one on our protective factors are life skills, those problem solving skills, coping skills that an individual has learned and is able to apply to a variety of problems. So, allowing children, allowing youth to experience little losses, to experience natural consequences, to learn from them and learn that they can get beyond them is a huge life skill that prepares them for the rest of their life, for the big problems that are coming later. Now, they may feel that this situation they're facing is a big problem, and their parents may see it as a little problem. But we still need to support them in their emotional reaction to it, in their ability to develop some optimism and future thinking about how they can get through it, and to teach them some coping skills about ways to take care of themselves when they're distressed. Who is safe to talk to? Who will give them good advice? What are some things just to take their minds off their problems that they can do to maintain their equilibrium through this difficult time? All of those things build resilience. Resilience is really the ability to maintain equilibrium, maintain stability in spite of the adversity that is coming your way. Along with that is a sense of optimism, this belief that I can get through this, that things will get better, that I can handle this, and a sense of self esteem. Not that I am the best, I am the greatest, I am wonderful, but I am important, I have value, I can get through tough times. A sense of purpose or meaning in life. I am part of a bigger culture. This culture is one in which we have endured hard things. Our culture has told us that we are people who are survivors and that no matter what is thrown at us, we can survive. Maybe this is a sense of military purpose, right? Our job is to serve and protect. It is protecting those around us. Being part of a military family is being part of that bigger mission. There may be cultural, religious, or personal beliefs that discourage suicide. That has been shown to be protective in some cases. And when those are front and center, and a person can also have support for their struggles along with those cultural, religious, and personal beliefs that discourage suicide, that's the ace in the hole. That's when we know that those things are really protective. So, access to that emotional support, and I would say effective emotional support. Um, we know that sometimes teenagers do the ain't it awful game when they talk with one another. Like they say, oh, this is so horrible. And their friend says, yes, it's so horrible. And then they can just spiral down. Effective emotional support is recognizing when their friend is struggling, being there as an anchor for hope and that they can get through it. And finally, we talk about access to effective behavioral health care. Effective behavioral health care is a link to someone who is skilled in working with youth. And when a youth is suicidal, someone who is skilled in suicide care. Those are both specialties within behavioral health. Um, Someone who works with adults primarily may be able to help somewhat with youth, but really it is a specialty, understanding and speaking their language. So I asked you just a moment ago to think about these protective factors, and I'd like you to type into the chat pod, where do you see these protective factors showing up in communities? Where do they show up in your community? I'm just going to pop back so you can look at those again. Okay, so in the chat, go ahead and type in where you see these kind of protective factors in your community. Who might be able to influence and strengthen these within your community where you live? Heidi, schools and churches, absolutely. Those are really cornerstones for our students. YMCA, teachers, Girl Scouts, yes, Connie, absolutely. Religious institutions, teachers, youth groups, base activities, yes, post, sports, child advocacy centers. Oh, you got it. Absolutely right. Oh, you guys are amazing. Grandparents, parents, youth centers, social groups, family, absolutely. Okay, good job. You're absolutely right. All of those are groups, neighbors, good job, Kate, are people that we can be thinking about including in our network of safety informed adults, right? We can absolutely think about that. And later in the presentation today, we'll be starting to make some plans around that. So I want to turn our attention now to warning signs of suicide. This fact sheet is available for you on sprc.org, and it should be in your resource center. When I talk about warning signs, let me be clear about what I'm talking about. Because people hear about risk factors, they hear about warning signs, and it gets confusing. Warning signs are individual signs of distress, things that a person may indicate that they are having a difficult time, and it might be related to suicide. We don't know. All right. I want you to think about driving in traffic. So you're in a car, you're driving in traffic, and up ahead, you can't really see very well, but up ahead, there's some flashing lights. Right. So what do we do when we see flashing lights? We need to do three things. We need to slow down. We need to pay attention to the environment, and we need to get more information. Those flashing lights might be a detour up ahead. Those flashing lights might be a car accident. Those flashing lights might be the roads washed out. It could be a lot of things. We don't know. That's why we've got to slow down, pay attention, and get more information. So as we go through the warning signs today, those are the kinds of things that we are really paying attention, these individual signs. So when a youth is showing these signs, we need to slow down, pay attention, get more information. So in youth, we're going to talk about different areas and ways that they can show these signs. The first is in their communication. And youth communicate in a variety of ways. They may be talking with a friend, and you might overhear their conversation. They may write this in a school report. They might text this. We don't know. But somehow they are saying this or expressing this, that they want to go to sleep and never wake up, right? That is a sign of super overwhelmed, right? They don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. Things are out of their control, and they just want it all to go away. That is a passive sign of suicide. They're not saying, I want to die, but they are saying, I just can't handle it anymore. We need to pay attention. This is a flashing light. Certainly, if they're talking about attempting suicide, if they're talking about killing themselves, this is lights and sirens and requires immediate intervention. Frequently, youth talk about unbearable emotional distress. They talk about it hurts so much. And it might be physical pain, but primarily we're talking about emotional pain, that they don't have the life skills to know that they can survive it. It's acute. It's the first time they've experienced it. terrible emotional pain. If their conversation has turned to death and dying and asking whether a certain method could kill you, well, that's on their mind. Again, flashing lights. We need to lean in and find out a little more information here. One of my son's friends asked whether a 22 could kill him. Warning sign, lights and sirens, needed to intervene immediately because clearly he was thinking about ending his life and using a firearm. So those are not things we can put off. We have to slow down and pay attention immediately and intervene. Another thing that might be a sign of suicide, we don't know, is worrying a lot of the time. Now, youth are anxiety monsters. They do worry a lot, but when we find that it's consuming their attention, they're not getting relief from it. So they stay at a highly agitated state. We need to lean in and learn more about that. Okay, so that's in their communication styles. Emotions. So maybe they're not saying anything, but we observe their emotional expression, expressing rage, this uncontrollable anger that is not characteristic for this child. Something is going on. We don't know what it means. We need to lean in. We need to find out more information. Feeling worthless, hopeless, trapped. Frequently, when a person feels trapped, they feel the only way out or the only control they have is to end their life. We know that's not the only solution, but sometimes they think that. These feelings of overwhelming guilt, shame, or anger, feeling like they're a burden to others, uh, that they have terribly embarrassed their family or they will embarrass their family if something comes to light. Those emotions are, we need to lean in and find out more about it. Maybe this is a trauma. Maybe this isn't suicide. Maybe it's trauma, but we don't know until we ask some questions. So let's talk about their behavior. So maybe we're not in a position to observe their communications and we don't know them well enough to know if those emotions are being shown, but we can see some signs and behaviors. Their energy level considerably dropped. As parents, we may see changes in sleeping patterns. We may see changes in eating patterns, right? These three are biological warning signs that something is significantly off with our youth. When we look at increased somatic complaints, unexplained symptoms, and this last one, particularly for teenagers, if they are losing interest in their personal appearance or hygiene, something is definitely wrong. We need to lean in and find out more information. Maybe it's thinking of suicide. I don't care anymore. Maybe there is something else going on. What has happened to them that has brought them to this place? Additional behaviors, increased alcohol or drug use. This includes tobacco use and vaping when they're a kiddo who would never do that. Becoming violent and reckless. Um, this can be things like having car accidents, um, grades falling, becoming fascinated with violent graphic content. The thing with the violent graphic content, what we're understanding about that is sometimes youth who are thinking about suicide begin watching these as a way to desensitize themselves in preparation for ending their life. So it's a very big warning sign that something is going on for sure. And these last three, social isolation, withdrawing from family, friends, or community, dropping out of drama. They quit going to rehearsal. They stop hanging out with their friends. They quit the football team. Um, and they write notes to their family or their friends saying things like, you've always been a good friend to me and I'll miss you, or you won't have to deal with me much longer. And giving away prized possessions. This last one is pretty rare, but it does occur. And it certainly is something we need to pay attention to. All right. I also want to comment on Potential precipitating events. These can occur and by themselves alone are not directly linked to suicide. But when these events happen on top of an already distressed situation for a young person, if they're already struggling, these are the kinds of things that can be a tipping point toward thinking about suicide. So we may think about significant losses, loss of a relationship, that first serious boyfriend or girlfriend, um, loss of connection. Their friend moves away. They have an aspiration to do something and now they can't. So, in military families, particularly, um, if a kiddo wants to go join the military, just like their dad, just like their brothers and sisters, and then find out they're ineligible, if they have a medical condition that makes it ineligible to enter the military, that can be pretty devastating, especially if that was part of how they thought of themselves and how they thought of their connection with their family. Okay. And a loss of identity, like if their identity was to be the head cheerleader at their high school. And now they're getting moved to a new high school. And of course, you can't be head cheerleader at your new high school. There's already cheerleaders there. That loss of identity on top of other things can be really devastating. But by itself, it's not a big thing. But on top of already being distressed in other ways, it can be very, very challenging. The second one, suicide death. We know that when an individual knows someone who has died by suicide, they're more at risk for dying by suicide themselves, whether that was a friend, a schoolmate, a family member, or someone that they admired. It could be a celebrity, it could be a TikTok influencer, but someone that they felt some kind of a connection with, and that person died by suicide. That makes it more vulnerable for an already distressed youth to then also think about it. It becomes a behavioral model. The third event is experiencing violence. This may be um, watching violence in the home. This may be being a victim of violence, either at school, um, could be dating violence, could be random violence in the community, and they were caught up in it. Again, that on top of already being vulnerable could be a precipitating event to begin thinking about suicide. It may just validate that feeling of being worthless. An arrest. An arrest can be a potentially precipitating event, especially in military families where the perception is that the family behaviors get reflected on their military family member. So a young person getting arrested has a negative impact on their family member, and they believe that their family would be better off if they weren't here. And then this last one, serious financial problems. If the family is really struggling, some as much as parents try to hide it, kids still know. Just like parents think that they've got the weapons hidden in their house and the youth will never find them, I ask them, well, what about Christmas presents? Do the kids always find the Christmas presents that you've got hidden? So the things that families have that they are not talking about are much more difficult for kids than if they have an open conversation. And then, of course, a recent onset of depression, anxiety, or extreme distress is a potentially precipitating event. And we should always be screening for suicide risk whenever we're seeing youth, when we see anyone for the first time, but particularly if these are coming up for our youth. So let's talk very specifically about military children and suicide. In terms of protective factors, first of all, military families are highly resilient. They are creative and flexible. For example, an unexpected move. Like they were not expecting to have to move for a couple more years, but needs of the military are such that now their military parent is being transferred to another base. So the attitude is that, okay, we can work around that. We can figure out a way to get through this. And they pull together to get through it, to get through the difficult time. They value being stronger together. They have better communication. They're part of a community with shared values and mission. And because they're part of that larger community, there are other kids like them who understand it, they get it. There are other family members who get it and understand it. And so coping with those changes, there's a little subculture there that can be very helpful. So when military families move to a new community, it's important to help them connect with other military families in that new community so that they can have the welcoming response. They can get the lowdown on where the good places are to go. And they immediately have people who understand those things around military culture that civilians and non military families just have never experienced. And so they don't understand it. But our military children do have some risk factors. Now, let me explain risk factors. Those are just things that we can't change, but do tend to increase risk for suicide. So, military children change schools 6 to 9 times during those 13 years, K through 12. Change is hard. And if connection is one of the chief protective factors and kids are changing schools that often, then sometimes what they're experiencing is they stop trying to make deep friendships. They sometimes stop trying to be in all the clubs. Or they have the exact opposite. They're jump right back in to getting on board with everything they were in before. But it's still hard to fit into a new peer group. What are the phrases people use there? What is the accent they're using? Military kids get really good at picking up local dialects, like Southern accents or Northeastern twang. They get very good and adaptable at that because you don't want to stick out and be that kid for very long. You really want to be part of that belonging group, like you're one of us. So they're very good at that. Um, they do have higher rates of suicidal behaviors compared to non military peers. One of the other facts we know about that is that they're exposed to suicide more often than non military peers because within the military, we see a higher rate of suicides. And it's actually a very small family. And it's more likely that they know one another. Adverse childhood events. I'm not going to talk a lot about ACEs because it's sort of a one and done. You can't change that they've had it. And the intensity of the ACE scoring is not very good, but it is associated that they have more ACEs than non-military peers. Okay, so let's now turn our attention to who is likely to see warning signs. Who in your community are you likely to encounter, or who's there that might see some of those communications, might observe those emotional changes, might observe behavior that is concerning, might be aware of precipitating events? Yeah, go ahead and in the chat pod. Wonderful. Yes. Family, friends, siblings. Yes. Coaches, teachers, pastors, their peers. Absolutely. School and friends. Yes. These are absolutely folks who are in a role, in a position to observe the flashing lights and maybe even hear flashing lights and sirens, right? It could be both because it might be a very concerning thing. And then do they know what to do? So let's take a look at an example. In Corsica High School, all the teachers are trained each year to recognize warning signs of suicide and to follow specific gatekeeper training. Ms. Gomez a social studies teacher was concerned about Tina, who's one of her students, because she knew Tina's mother is currently deployed. One day, she overheard Tina telling a friend that her boyfriend had just dumped her, that she'd given up trying to pass math, and thought that her friend Jamal, who had taken his life recently, had the right idea. So as you look through this example, I want you to think about what are the warning signs. And I'm going to ask you to type that into the chat pod, and I'll drop back over here to the example for you to look at. The warning signs in Tina, right? Her personal signs that something is going on. Okay. So loss of a boyfriend, right? Loss of a relationship, struggling in math, suicide of a friend. Yes, yes, yes. So there's some hopelessness, right? She's given up. She's not just struggling in math, she's given up on trying to pass it. Hopeless that that's going to happen, right? Okay, very good, very good. So we have loss of a relationship, doing poorly in math, and has given up. And there's some passive suicidal ideation, meaning that her friend had the right idea. So maybe she's thinking about it, right? So those are warning signs. That's the lights and sirens about what's going on with Tina. Tina has an additional risk factor, right? Not a warning sign, a risk factor that her mom's deployed, right? All right, now maybe, oh, some other folks have written in, maybe she's less caring about her personal appearance. Maybe she's having some angry outbursts. Sure, absolutely could be. More withdrawn. Yes, those are absolutely right. Okay, so in this example, there's also protective factors. All right, so we want you to take a look at what are the protective factors in this example. See if you can find out what are the protective factors here. Yeah, Kate, she is talking about pain. That's right. Training of school staff. Yeah, that's a protective piece of the network, right? And the teachers are trained to recognize warning signs. Yes. And to follow gatekeeper training. Yes, she has a relationship with her teacher. She's telling her friend about her problems. So she's communicating it, right? Very good. And yes, the teacher has some concerns about the military situation. So not only is this faculty at this school trained in suicide prevention, sort of basic gatekeeper training, it's also a military friendly campus. The teachers are aware of potential military impact on the students who are military connected. Absolutely. So that is a piece of weaving this social network together that is going to be protective and catch students who are like Tina, struggling and starting to think about what might be a bad outcome. Okay. Yeah, teachers, training, sharing with friends. Very good. Okay, so let me ask you in the chat pod, what should Ms. Gomez do? She's overheard this conversation. What's the next thing she should do? Okay, Lily says talk to her. Heidi says talk to the student, talk with Tina, share her concerns, talk to her. Absolutely. Show support, inquire. Yes, yes. Talk privately. Absolutely, Jen. This is a private conversation. Yes. Okay, absolutely right. So the warning signs are there. We don't know what they mean, but the only way we do is we slow down and we focus and we get more information. The only way we're going to get information is by having a conversation, asking her directly if she's thinking of suicide. Yes. Assist in getting support outside of school. Yes. Contact superiors for added support. Yes. The school counselors. Yes, absolutely. This school has a specific protocol in place. She will need to follow that protocol. But that protocol clearly is about inquiring more about what's going on with her. Very good. Very good. Asking directly about suicidal thoughts. Yes. Let me be clear about that. There's a, very early in my career, I had a client teach me this lesson. We were talking about urgent. She was in the emergency room. She was obviously emotionally distressed. And as a new counselor, I said, "Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself?" And she looked at me and she took a big sigh and she goes, "No." I said, "Oh, then I'm like, oh, phew, yay, she's not thinking about it." She said, "I'm thinking about killing myself. That's not going to hurt." So it's important that we ask the right question. We ask directly about suicide. Are you thinking about ending your life? Are you thinking about suicide? Very directly, very clearly, because hurting yourself and suicide may be two different things for the person in front of you, right? Okay. Well, let's say Tina is she could have two responses, right? She could have a response of, "Oh, what? No, hey, no, I'm not thinking about that. Oh, that would be terrible for my family. I would never do that. I'm just completely overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And I can't talk to my mom because she's deployed and everything is just coming down on me." Okay. That's a big whew, but we still want to connect her with a school counselor, with a professional who can then follow through on helping her with those coping skills. The other response we could get from Tina is when we ask the question, "I heard what you said to your friend about all the things you're going through and that Jamal maybe had the right idea. Are you thinking about suicide?" And she might say, "Well, I am just really overwhelmed." She didn't deny it. So she's trying to minimize it, probably trying to check if it's okay to admit it to you. So you may need to follow that up with, you've got a lot going on. And sometimes when kids have a lot going on, they think about suicide as a way out. Have you thought about that? So you kind of make it okay for them to say yes, like it's not this radical, horrible thing, but it's something we can talk about. And then if it is, then you have a conversation about it. You say, "I care about you. I care about what you're going through. And I think you can get through this. And I want to help you get through this. Let's figure out what the next steps are." And then we're talking about bringing in a professional, a school counselor, a mental health professional. And yes, you need to bring in a parent, guardian, caregiver at some point in this conversation. Okay. We're going to talk about moving on to a personalized coping plan. When we think about a personalized coping plan, it is a way to help. Whoops, we already did those. There we go. Help to self manage those emotions and prevent crisis in the future. So we're going to use the current situation to help them think through how they can cope with what's going on now and how to help them cope with what's coming in the future. So when we think about a crisis safety plan, a personalized coping plan, these are the two major plans that are out there: the Stanley Brown Safety Plan and the Crisis Response Plan. These are tools that we can use to help youth learn the coping strategies to overcome those distressing events, those thoughts that are overwhelming to them. So, first of all, when we look at the Stanley and Brown Safety Plan and the Crisis Response Plan, they're very similar. It starts off with warning signs, right? What were the things that they were experiencing that said, "Boy, things are bad"? Like their warning signs might be, "I'm giving up on trying harder. I'm sad all the time. I don't have anybody to talk to." Or it might be that, "I can't sleep. What were the things going on in them that would tell them next time, oh, I'm headed down a bad path. I don't want to go there. I need to pay attention, right? Lights and sirens, but their own personal ones. Okay. And this is not a form, I want to be clear. You do not hand this to them and they fill it out. You two work on it together. This is an intervention, and you use the current crisis as an opportunity for them to learn these new skills. So you co write this together. So in the second step, those are internal coping strategies, things that they can do to take their mind off their problems, not involving anybody else. What can they do to distract themselves? So things like I could go for a run. Okay. Write that down. Go for a run. I could go play the piano. Right. I could go throw the ball with my dog or take my dog to the park. Okay. So you write these things down and then you say, okay, are these things you could do any time of day? Oh, no, you couldn't go for a run late at night. Okay, well, let's say that you're kind of struggling and it's late at night. What could you do to get your mind off your problems and it's late at night? Right. So you, as the clinician, will do that sort of reality checking on the strategies that they come up with. You might have a few in your back pocket that you would want to suggest, but you really want to be able to support the ones they come up with. And there's three lines here. Nobody says you have to only have three. You could have seven, right? So when they go to this step of internal coping strategies, they do all these things and it's still not working. They're still feeling upset. Their mind is still reeling around about these problems that they're having. All right, step two, social settings that could provide distraction. Who could I just go hang out with, not talk about the problem that I'm having, but just be with? Just hang out, maybe play some video games, maybe binge watch a TV show, maybe go to a coffee shop and just watch traffic or people watch at the mall, whatever that is. What are some things they can do that's going to distract them from their problems? Who can they be with? Where is it? Who is it? You want to have these people's names and their contact information written down. You want to have the place written down. And then you also do a little reality check again in the middle of the night. You know, probably can't go to the mall. You probably can't go to the coffee shop. What could you do? Who could you call in the middle of the night and just chill with? Right. We don't want them doing that. But if they're going to, what can we do around those things? And then step four, people I can ask for help during a crisis. These are people we can talk to, people who have the maturity to be able to handle a tough conversation, people who are willing to be there for them. And so these are not a 14-year-old needing another 14-year-old to hang out with and talk to about how terrible they're feeling. No, that's a good spiral into a bad place. You do want people here that they feel like they can talk to. Maybe it's the coach. Can they talk with a coach? Is the coach willing to be their person? So that's why we have their name and contact information, because we also check that out, right? So if Tina says, oh, I can talk to Coach Johnson, that would be somebody I can ask for help because she's always had my back in volleyball and she said I could call her anytime and she kind of knows what's going on. So we write her down and then we say, when we're all done, we'll say, let's just double check with coach, make sure that she's okay with that and that she knows when you call that you're really calling because you're struggling. Is that okay with you? Right. And of course, you get a release and you do that. Okay. So generally, we want these to be adults and we want it to be an agreed um, person on there. The other thing with this is these also need to be people that parents are okay with because not all adults are good advice. So that's a point where we want to review this safety plan with a parent when we're all done. So step five is professionals or agencies that they can contact during a crisis. So are they seeing a counselor? Who is that? And what's all their information? Remember, in a crisis, our problem solving, our frontal brain doesn't work really well. So we want this piece of paper to be front and center. We want it to be available with all the information right at the fingertips. Okay. And if they can't reach that counselor, who else could they reach, right? Who's a backup? And then their local emergency contacts. 988 is a great forum for youth. Um, 988 has a couple sub networks. So you dial 988, it is the national crisis and suicide lifeline. So it's a 3-digit number similar to 911 emergency that is specifically for mental health, behavioral health crisis response. And so you call 988 and they have an auto routing system that comes on, suicide prevention lifeline. If you need to reach the military crisis line, you press 1. So family members can access the military crisis line if they want to. Many times military families do not want to because they're afraid that that would somehow get back to their military family members' chain of command and reflect badly on them. So most do not press 1. They just wait for the rest of the tree. So the rest of the tree also is Spanish speaking and also youth, LGBTQ. So though, and then there's a fourth one for hearing deaf impaired. So those are options that are available on the network, or you can just hold for the next counselor. Um, and then the last one here about making the environment safe. We've de-escalated the kiddo. They've engaged their frontal lobe. They now have a plan for how they're going to cope with things in the future. We also need to talk about guarding against emotional hijack. If things just come cascading down all of a sudden, what are the things you were thinking about? What do we need to make safer at home or in your environment to prevent an impulsive act or for when those dark thoughts overwhelm you? So there may be firearms at home. There may be medications easily accessible. Whatever that kiddo has been thinking about, those are the things we need to make safer during the crisis. Okay. The Stanley and Brown safety plan also is an app. So the kid can download the app and you can fill it out on their phone. Um, I see we have someone suggested in the chat to take a picture of it. Fabulous. People are always on their phone and their friends don't have to know what they're looking at. But having access to their phone, having a copy of this on there, absolutely, that's a great plan. So having a conversation with a parent about their safety plan, bringing the parent in, talking about where the kiddo's at, talking about the thoughts that they were having and where they're at now, and they're doing better. And we've worked on this plan. We want to go over it with you, and we want you to be a part of it. So parents need to understand their role as well and how to intervene in this crisis effectively as a parent. Okay. One thing about making the environment safer, we want to put time and distance between the thought and the action. Very few people who have their suicide plans delayed or interrupted will go on to die by suicide. That doesn't mean that suicide is necessarily an impulsive act. It means that when there's more time and distance, they have an opportunity to have a self-rescue thought. They have an opportunity for their brain to think, not today, or not now, or I have something else to live for. I can always do this in the future. I don't want to do this now. And when that is delayed and interrupted, hope takes over, optimism takes over, and they have a chance to pursue a different path. So we really want to have this opportunity to make that time and distance. And that's what I talk about when I talk with parents about this, that yes, weapons in the home are a form of self-defense. What can we do to put time and distance between it to keep your environment safe so your son or your daughter doesn't end their life? All right. So when we're talking about individual crisis support, who can help? What is their role? What is their readiness? And who can give consent? Right? So definitely parent or guardian or caregiver, whoever that is, they definitely have a role in individual crisis support. They must be willing. Most parents are. Understanding warning signs, knowing what is helpful to do. So, as a parent, as a psychologist, I talk to you about this because I've experienced it in my own family. One of my sons went through a cascade of devastating connection events. Lost his girlfriend, broke his foot in football, found out he had type 1 diabetes, couldn't join the military, all within the span of about 10 days. So, on top of that, going to school the next day after learning all this, and the breakup with a girlfriend was his first true love, brokenhearted, parents won't let him see her, shows up at school, sees her, and sees his best friend with his arm around her. It was more than he could cope with. And he had thoughts of suicide. That was the tipping point for him. Not only did he lose his girlfriend, he lost his best friend and football and his future all within 10 days. So that suicidal crisis, um, no one's immune to it, right? This is my specialty. I should be immune to this. No, of course not. I'm human. My family is human. We all have the same problems as other people. But knowing what's going to be effective to help. So learning what for that child help and support looks like. It's going to be different from child to child. So in this situation, who else can help? So certainly there was me. He has two older brothers. One of them he's very close to. He was definitely a source of support. Texted with him multiple times a day. Had a couple teachers at school who really looked out after him, a spiritual leader who went and visited him in the hospital. And he had one true friend, right? You have a lot of friends, but until you go through something really difficult, do you find out who your deep, true friends are? And for him, it was the one he'd been friends with all through elementary school, all the way up. So these are individuals that could be on his safety plan, right? And they are willing and know what to do and how to help. And their role, right? It is not their role to rescue. That is the role of EMS. That is the role of the police. That is the role of a parent. Their role is to provide emotional support. And if it doesn't seem to be working, like the person's really stuck, they may need to reach out to professional care to get emergency care for them, not to intervene themselves. Okay. Teachers or coaches may not personally be in a place to be able to offer the kind of support that kiddo needs. They need to be okay with saying no. And we need to be okay with them saying, no, I'm not in a place I can do that right now. Or that makes me uncomfortable. It's a hard conversation, but we'd rather have people on a safety plan who are willing to be on a safety plan and prepared for it than just a name on a paper and we hope they're going to be a good person, right? So we look at the youth. The youth give consent for who we're going to talk to. The parent or guardian and caregiver need to also be okay with who's on the list and understand all the roles of people going to be involved. Okay. So we've talked a lot about uh, weaving these things together and what is this going to look like in communities. So let's move on and talk about building this transformation in our communities, weaving together the tapestry of protection for our youth. I took loom weaving in college. It was the only art class that fell on a Tuesday, Thursday when I had an opening. So I have just a slight information about weaving, but I really like the idea of pulling together different strands of people from across our community who have different roles, but have the potential to be able to see the lights and sirens, hear the things that children are saying, observe the problems that they're having, and be willing to step forward and be part of a safety net, not necessarily a rescuer, but being willing to be in a position to do that. So, transforming communities, there are key elements for implementing a comprehensive community based suicide prevention approach. There are 7 key elements. This was developed by the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. And today we're going to be just talking about this first one about unity. We really don't have time to go into all of them, but we're going to talk about unity and how we pull these things together. How can our community be unified to prevent suicide? And for us right now, we're going to be focused on youth. So here are the key steps. Number 1, brainstorm. Come up with a list of individuals and organizations who could potentially be involved, right? So the list you already started by responding earlier was a great starting point. Those who are in a position to be part of recognizing how we can prevent suicide, recognizing the warning signs, those protective factors that can be grown, right? Their role might be to teach a coping skills class or to teach, as part of health class, teach some emotional awareness and some emotional coping. That could be their role. Not necessarily in a bigger suicide prevention role, but that could be a piece of this weaving that you're putting together. So brainstorm who all could be part of this. And then once you have your list, you thoughtfully think it through. What would their role be? What would they bring to the table? What will they get out of being part of this group? And what potential conflicts might there be? Like, what might be their objections? And once you've kind of mapped those things out, then reach out to those community leaders. Go and have a conversation with them, specifically about who you are, why you're trying to do this, and what you hope to accomplish. Set up the ways you're all going to collaborate. Address the needs of the group. There are going to be people involved in this group who have had a suicide loss, and they may need some information on coping with that loss. That may be their motivation for being involved. Then you're going to educate them all about suicide prevention. So you all have shared language, you have shared understanding, and then you'll get a little more formalized in these partnerships. How often you're going to meet, how are you going to set goals, how are you going to measure goals, and so on. So let's talk about military families and communities. Make sure that you are including existing resources in your community that specifically serve military families. There are organizations for veterans throughout your communities. Those can be very helpful. But we're really looking at active duty families. What is happening within your community? Are you looking at on post? Who's there? Your family support group. Are there individuals there you can tap to be part of the community resources in supporting youth? Because most youth go to public high school, right? They're not necessarily on base or on post. Most are in public school. So we want to make sure that the community, the school, is very educated, integrated, and sensitive to what we may be needing here. We gain commitments to support our youth and to collaborate in that process. Make sure you're involving military connected families in planning this weaving together. They have knowledge about what they need, but they also have very good knowledge of what other families need, what they have seen and experienced in other communities, and can bring that forward. Share together with your larger group that understanding of the unique strengths and needs of military families. Because non-military connected organizations really don't know. They really don't understand. There's a very easy, basic training on military culture that they can take. It's online, it's free, it's very well done. It's on the Psych Armor website, and the link is there on this page. And then finally, you want to integrate your strategic planning, your resource networking, your educating, so that you're doing both. you're doing suicide prevention, you're doing military culture, and they're all coming together. So, call to action. Let's get started weaving your community safety net where you're going to catch all children, but particularly our youth that are military connected. All right. So, going to create your list of potential partners. Who has access to groups most at risk for suicide? Right? Who would represent a diversity of cultures in the community? What organization can impact risk factors for suicide? What organizations could impact the community's specific prevention factors for suicide? And who has the leverage, right? Influence, resources, skills, funding to help make this move forward? And who has lived experience with suicide thoughts, attempts, or deaths? People with lived experience, either their own experience or a family member's experience, bringing those things forward so that you're getting an authentic voice in your process and multiple people who could be involved and share that barriers and freeways to getting the care that people need. So then we want to engage our potential partners. The three W's: who, what, and why. We have to start with you personally. Who are you and who do you represent? This is your elevator speech, right? I'm Teresa Humphreys Wadsworth. I'm a suicidologist. I represent our community mental health center. We would like to invite you to be part of a community prevention planning. As our community mental health center, we are dedicated to serving our community, improving mental health, and particularly focused on our youth and improving the mental health in our youth and preventing suicide. All right, so that would be your three W's personal speech. That's about you because you're going to go out and have that speech. Then you need to answer the what's in it for me question. And that's the question that the person's going to have in the back of their mind that you need to be prepared for, right? What is the benefit for them to be a part of this? How are they going to add value to what you're doing? And how is being involved in this going to be valuable to them and what they're doing? Where's the crosswalk between those two? So if you're talking with law enforcement, and we know that being arrested is a particular warning sign, problem of a youth, how can we, if I'm a mental health counselor, how can I talk with law enforcement about a win-win? How can we talk about if they're part of this, they can help us better understand where the challenges are and what kids are experiencing? How can we better help them by providing, maybe we would provide expedited access to counseling for kids who have been arrested? I don't know. How are we going to work together? And what are the barriers going to get in the way? And how will you together address those barriers? So be very clear about what you're asking that organization to do. Are you asking them to come to some meetings? Are you asking them to provide their expertise into developing a strategic plan? What is it you need them to do? And then what is the next immediate steps you want your partner to take? Get it cleared. I'd like to come back with you next week and talk more specifically about who else you see in the community should be involved, right? Pick their brain because we all know our circle, but we have overlapping circles and people connect other people that we may never even consider. Then you need to set up ways you're going to collaborate. Who is going to lead this community initiative? You need a leadership group. You need to have recurring meetings for your community partners. You need to have a specific communication channel that everybody generally will agree to. And you need to have shared goals. What is it we want to accomplish? How will we know when we have accomplished that? What is the data that we have in front of us that we might be able to impact? Some of that data might be youth mental health visits in the emergency room, might be youth arrest rates, or might be youth um, alcohol use. It might, could be a variety of things. What are the shared goals your group is going to work on together to address this larger problem of suicide and build these strengthening protective factors? Because these protective factors are protective against many things. It's protective against suicide. It's also protective against underage drinking. It's also protective against drug use. So it can be a platform that integrates many prevention activities focused on youth. So here's a web where a youth is connected to multiple spheres and people who we may be thinking about. So, where does the youth live? Specifically, their home. Who's in the home who could be part of this? Neighborhood. Is there a specific neighborhood, and are there neighborhood watch programs? Are there neighborhood culture centers? What's in the area around where that youth lives, and who might be a leader in that area? Maybe you want to focus on a particular subset of your community that is higher at risk, or maybe not. Health. So this involves medical and behavioral health care. We're focused on both because most kids do not see a child psychiatrist for psychiatric meds. Most youth are getting their psychiatric meds from a primary care provider. So we need to have our medical providers involved, and we need to have a close relationship with the behavioral health care within our communities. Is there a group or affinity that needs to be involved around youth identity? LGBTQ alliances within schools are one way to think about that. You may think about other identities. You may think about 4-H. You might think about YMCA. There are other groups where youth may be involved that are outside the school setting. Certainly, we talked about faith and spiritual practice. How can we get those folks involved? Safety, law enforcement, and EMS, right? You go back to the prevention and the risk, the warning signs, and how do those overlap? Where can we build in those protective factors? Where do youth play? What are they doing for fun? They may be involved in all kinds of things, both in school and out of school. And I particularly think about those things that are outside of school because those are additional adult resources that have a different view of the kiddos. And they very seldom get tapped to be part of an initiative like this. And they can be very powerful and bring new and strong perspectives to what's happening. Culture. Is there a particular culture within your community, a heritage, including military, that can be tapped into? In parts of Wyoming, there are strong Native American groups that are active. We want to tap into those in that community so that they are a part of directing this prevention and protection activity. There may be, there are groups of Hispanic. We have large Hispanic group growing in Wyoming. So looking at the Mexican American clubs and how can we support their culture and their cultural interpretation of suicide and how we can protect against that. Right? Schools, definitely, we want academics, bands, sports clubs, teams, all of that involved in ways that support belongingness. And with eyes on kids that are in those, trying to get into those, or maybe have disappeared. And then finally, we want to look at employers. Employers are a huge source of influence on our young people. These are the first adults that they're going to deal with that aren't parents, that aren't teachers, but have authority and influence and are that kind of independent voice and can be part of these solutions. So when we think about this and we think about starting to connect these community groups, we start seeing the web build together. And as we build linkages between one group and another group, we start to close the gaps in the web. So we might have, for example, a school reach out to the YMCA or the dance studio or the art studio and invite them to come and participate in the suicide prevention gatekeeper training that they're offering. What a way to make sure that those adults are all on the same page and that they are all seeing and going to respond in the same way. Wouldn't it be cool if the mental health center reached out to the churches and offered them some gatekeeper training on the warning signs of suicide and how to access behavioral health care for those youth who may need it? Right? So, as you're building your web in your community, map this out. Think about these connections and how they're going to overlap, how they're going to grow together, and where the gaps are, and who's in a position to make a connection that would strengthen your community web. So, as we think forward in your community, what steps are you going to take next week to strengthen your community's network of support for youth and children? All right, short answer. What step can you take next week to strengthen your community support network for youth and children? Go ahead and type that in. All right, and Kaylin commented, who is a part of your community providers on and off installation? Who can you build relationships with? Who can you add to? Sharing the information with leadership. Yes, Heidi, absolutely. When leadership has a better understanding of the connectedness within your communities, they can get behind efforts to grow that safety network. Yes, Meg, discuss it with the schools you work in. Absolutely. You know, earlier the example we used was of a school teacher who had been trained in gatekeeper training. But what if Ms. Gomez, the social studies teacher, what if Ms. Gomez was actually the school bus driver? Might we have had a different outcome? The question is, because they trained all school teachers in suicide prevention, warning signs, and gatekeeper training, what about the bus drivers? What about the custodians? What about the lunchroom workers? They often overhear conversations that students are more careful about around teachers. They often know what's in the lockers. They often hear things in unguarded moments. So they also could be a part of that network within your schools. All right, so I challenge you to step forward and take these strengthening steps within your community. This is not a get it all done next week. No, this is a start mulling this over, developing your list of people who could be involved. Absolutely. Oh, well, I love this. Post cafeteria workers often have healthy relationship with students and know who isn't eating lunch. Absolutely. Financial problems, food scarcity. Absolutely. Okay. TRICARE approved pediatric providers. Yes, absolutely. These are opportunities to help them better help the kids they're working with by understanding the network that they can plug into. Good job. All right. So thank you for your time today. You see the resources here are available on the resource and link section and the webinar event page. You can find those materials.
Thank you so much, Dr. Humphreys Wadsworth. And we also wanted to note two webinars that we actually recently had last month in October 2023. Those were really talking about the amplified psychological distress that grieving youth experience due to traumatic loss or stigmatized death such as suicide, and how providers are uniquely positioned to help support children facing suicide-related losses. So we really dived into those manifestations of trauma and grief in children and how they intersect and can impact learning and behavior, and how to know when a grieving child needs therapeutic intervention. So we definitely wanted to mention this webinar, Understanding Childhood Traumatic Loss Through the Lens of a Multidimensional Grief Theory, as well as addressing maladaptive grief reactions among youth. Both of those sessions are now available for archive viewing, as well as continuing education credit opportunities. And here as we move into the citations, of course, those are noted on the additional resources for today in case you would like to do any additional reading on those um, journals and articles and research that has informed this session. And as we move into today's questions, I believe all of the questions were really noted throughout the presentation. We did have one question come through. Dr. Humphreys Wadsworth, as you noted, in terms of, you mentioned briefly about, medical medicines prescribed to youth. And we did have one attendee ask if our in your experience, are accidental overdoses considered suicide attempts? So, for example, I believe they probably experienced a teenager that believed they were taking enough medication to just sleep, but then went on to consume too much of that medication.
Right, that's a great question. When we're determining suicide risk, right, so evaluating whether someone attempted suicide or is going to attempt suicide, the thing that we're looking at is intent. What was the intent of this behavior? So if the intent was to go to sleep, or was the intent to go to sleep and never wake up? That's the question you have to ask. It's accidental if it was just enough to go to sleep. But if it was go to sleep and not ever wake up, then we're talking suicide. So it's part of that suicide risk assessment, that clinical intervention that a suicide care expert has with that kiddo in evaluating what happened and determining whether that was a suicide attempt or not.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this presentation today. And I'm going to go ahead and move in. And again, if you would like to revisit this presentation or the recording, it will be available within 24 to 48 hours, about 1 to 2 business days on the event page. So the link to the evaluation is available on the event page as well. When you visit that page, you will see the purple button like the one on the slide now. Simply click that and you will be taken to an evaluation and a post test. Your feedback is very important to us, so please do take that short evaluation, letting us know your thoughts on today's webinar as well as upcoming webinars. For those wanting to obtain CE credits after the evaluation, you will be taken to a list of CE opportunities offered for this session. Continuing education credits will be available from the University of Texas at Austin, Steve Hicks School of Social Work, the Commission for Case Manager Certification, the National Council on Family Relations, the Patient Advocate Certification Board, and the American Association for Family and Consumer Sciences. Certificates of attendance are also available for anyone wishing to document their professional development hours. If you have had the event page pulled up since the beginning of this session, please give it a moment and refresh that page so that those links that have been added since then can populate for you. If you have any questions or any issues at all, please email us. Some certificates do require the completion of a post test, and once that post test has been completed with a score of 80% or higher, those certificates should be emailed to you within 24 to 48 hours of completing the process. Some email providers will direct those to your spam folder, especially if this is your first time joining us or completing the process. So please be sure to check your spam folder first. But if you have not received that certificate within a day or so to your email, please give myself or my colleague Jason Jowers an email at oneopfamilydevelopment@gmail.com and just let us know any issues you are having, and we will be more than happy to make sure you do receive your certificate.